Hey, thanks for joining Gary's Shortlist podcast. Today we're going to have a chat with Brad Parker, CEO of Mates in Construction. You may have heard of Mates in Construction, Mates in Mining, Mates in Manufacturing. These guys are fantastic. But before we start, I just want to say that we're going to talk about mental health and suicide prevention. And this can be very confronting for some and a tough subject. And we're not aiming to trigger any issues here with anybody. It's very difficult to pick up on people's reactions or emotions when we're not face to face, obviously. If today's not the day for you to listen to this discussion around suicide or mental health, I'd encourage you to tune out and perhaps look at this another time. If you are struggling with any mental health issues at the moment, please call Lifeline 13 11 14 if it's a matter of urgency. And of course, you can contact Mates in Construction. Their construction helpline is 1300 642 111. Thanks for listening. Brad, so nice to see you again. Welcome to Gary's Shortlist podcast. It's great to see you. How have you been?
Yeah, good, Gary, and thanks for having us on. I'm looking forward to having the chat with you today and talking everything what Mates in Construction is and what we're doing out there in the industry.
Mate, I really appreciate you coming on. It's Mates in Construction. I don't think there's too many people out there that don't know about Mates. And I guess from an outsider looking in, it's grown and grown and grown into what it is today. I believe it started in 2008, and we'll go through that. And mate, I hear nothing but fantastic feedback. I hear a lot of the big organisations have embraced the support that Mates can provide and the training that Mates can provide. And so, mate, we'll probably cover bits and pieces, but let's perhaps kick off. Tell us, Brad, tell us a little bit about your background and how you landed in the CEO of Mates in New South Wales.
Well, I do have a bit of a dark past, Gary, as you may be aware. I'm a former trade union official. I worked at the CFMEU, the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union, but the Construction and General Division to start off with. Although they've been in the news recently, not for all the right reasons probably, but look, I started off there as an education officer and I had many, many roles. I was probably very lucky because I had a diverse number of roles, different areas. I then went on to organise in the furnishing industry. I then became secretary of the old, what they called the Furnishing Trades Division, which was an old union titled the Federated Furnishing Trade Society of Australasia. That's a mouthful, Gary.
We love an acronym in construction too, mate.
Yeah, there's acronyms all around bloody trade union movement. But anyway, and then I became president of the Forestry Furnishing Products Division. I then went back to construction. That's another story in itself. And I had many other roles there in the construction division of the union, but I ended up as the National Assistant Secretary of the Construction and General Division of the CFMEU. I was on the divisional executive and on the national executive of the union. But my role was less adversarial. Some people may confuse me. I have a twin brother. I have an identical twin brother who obviously is not as humble or as good looking as I am, Gary.
No, not
at all. He was the state secretary. And my role was not adversarial. My role was more to do with work health and safety and at a national level, and then looking at the legislation, looking at things like high risk work licensing. I'm not going to bore you with all the detail, but it was also vocational education and training nationally. It was governance and it was compliance, and I was managing the national office that was based in Sydney. So that might develop into why I ended up at Mates, I guess. Here I was in a very important role, looking at safety within our industry, looking at safety and training, and ensuring that we have training components there to ensure that we've got quality and safety. So I was very much focused on that sort of stuff. It got to travel the world. I've got to say, it was quite an amazing role that I had there. And then one day somebody showed me the alarming disproportionate rates of suicide in the construction industry. And as I delved deeper into it, it was like some sort of thing just hit me. Like here I am. I thought that I was concentrating on a very important role, looking at safety and for making sure construction workers were not injured or lost their lives at work. But then I saw the suicide rates. So the suicide rates, if you look at them currently, a construction worker is 80 times more likely to suicide than the national age population. They are 6 times more likely to suicide than die from a workplace accident. And then if you get into the younger demographic, it gets worse, right? Those ages between 15 to 24 years, they're 11 times more likely to die by suicide than a workplace accident. So, and if I remember back, one of the early things that I did within the CFMU was looking at a training program that, the young apprentices and tradespeople within the TAFE system could utilise to try and keep them alive. But then I looked at the suicide stats. I was completely outraged. And I have 4 sons of my own. A couple of them have worked in our industry. I've still got one working in the industry at the moment. And I was, it sort of hit home to me. And that's why I got involved. I was motivated by the outrageous statistics.
Yeah. Look, you're right, Brad. They're extremely sobering. And in fact, when we're losing a construction worker in Australia every second day, for an ex-safety guy like me, it kind of makes me think, was I looking at the wrong end of the stick? If we're focusing as we do on risk in front of our eyes and everything that we can see, and of course the mental health and the it's certainly getting some light shed on it now, particularly as a result of what we've been through with COVID. But it makes me reflect on whether the safety industry actually put enough focus on the health and safety. And
same here. I had the same thoughts. It makes you. But there is real hope. There is real hope, and hopefully, today I'll go through that and
Terrific.
talk about hope. So it is a positive story, not a negative one.
Absolutely. So Brad, Mates kicked off. How was it born? How did Mates start?
Yeah, really good question, Gary. What it was back in 2007. The BERT Fund, Building Employees Redundancy Trust, one of these redundancy trust funds that exist within the industry, autonomously within each state. The BERT Fund is up in Queensland. They had a death claim component within their trust fund. So they pay out on all kinds of deaths, inside and outside of work. And they were looking at between 99 to 2007, they had 399 death claims, 400 death claims, right? But out of that, 88 were suicides. And they went, that's really high. Like, maybe we should investigate this further. So they then got hold of Griffith University, in particular, the Australian Institute of Suicide Research and Prevention. And they then investigated, they pumped a lot of money into it. And they then investigated the most comprehensive report in the world in any workplace into suicides. And what they discovered was outrageous. Was really terrible stuff. There was some good stuff that come out though. That is that we were trying to identify why. The big question is always, when I work in Mates in Construction, whether you're inside the industry or outside the industry, people always ask me, why is it that we have disproportionate rates of suicide in the construction industry? One of the big ones was, and there was many, but one of the big ones was that 93% of construction workers who had suicided in the past never sought professional help. So they either didn't know where to find it, they didn't want to find it, or the big one was they weren't encouraged to. So that was really the premise of what Mates was built on, about we don't seek to be the mental health professionals, we don't seek to know it all, but what we want to be is connecting people up to support and ensuring that they're getting that support in the first instance, and breaking down that stigma. That's not you're not weak if you talk about your emotional issues. We actually need to talk about them more broadly and openly, and discuss it in a way that everybody feels that they're not judgmental. Like, it's not, we don't judge people, but because I think there's some really good people in our industry. As you know, Gary, that I've met some magnificent people. So we utilize the most important component we have within our industry, and that is its people. And we may have stumbled across something that the rest of the world are now looking to see that, there's something going on there in Australia,
Absolutely. And I see more recently you guys have had recognition through the World Health Organization. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So we've won a couple of awards over the years, but this one we didn't see coming. And so back about 2 months ago, the World Health Organization in Geneva acknowledged mates as being an example of world's best practice of mental health and suicide prevention in the workplace. So I did some tracking to see how they sort of discovered us. But one of our founders, Jorgen Gillistrup, who has just left Mates recently, only very recently. He was the former CEO in Queensland and one of the founders of Mates. He'd done a paper. He'd written up a paper that I think was utilised in an international conference. And then someone at the World Health Organization decided to track that a bit further and then looked into the Mates program. So, we can beat our chest and say, aren't we wonderful, aren't we great? But what we're always evaluating, and we're always sort of looking at what we can do better. And look, we have reduced suicides. We have evidence to say that we've reduced suicides by 7.9% in the industry.
Wow.
So I think that we're starting to have a massive impact, and the rest of the world's looking to, they're saying, how did a blue collar industry, construction workers in Australia combat, because, we've got some bullheads, right? We've got some colourful racing identities in our industry. We've got all sorts, right? We've got some wonderful people as well, right? But how did they do that, right? And it's quite simple at the end of the day. I often say, mental health and suicide can be complex, but it may not be so complex to fix. And I'm going to talk about that today with you.
Wow. That's congrats on the recognition. That's hats off to you guys. So I guess, Brad, for the listener now, trying to understand what Mates is about if they're not aware, what do you guys do?
Yeah.
And how can you help an organisation, I guess?
Yeah. So we're a holistic program, right? So there's lots of people in this mental health space. You'll hear their names. You know who they are. It'll be Lifeline. It'll be Black Dog. You can rattle them all off. It can be, Are You Okay? Even it can be all these different people. But I think what sets us apart is that we're very active on the ground, right? And we're active for a reason, because we didn't want that clinician approach. So you have the mental health professionals, and sometimes I think people refer to them as the white coats, which is, it's not very nice. But look, because, we are an evidence-based, research-based program as well, right? And I'll talk about our National Academic Reference Group, which they're professors and they're doctors that come from universities right across the country. I commonly refer to them as the Nerd Squad, Gary, because they're all nerds. But they're fantastic nerds, let me say that. But look, we wanted to ensure that we had real construction, but people that know the industry and people that can speak at that level, because we wanted to encourage everybody to come with us and make a real impact and make them feel comfortable within this, So,
I think you've hit. Yeah, sorry to cut you off there, Brad. I think you guys have hit that on the head perfectly.
Yeah.
As we all know, that if it's not in an environment, in a lingo, in the fashion, as you say, without the white coat, the workers won't communicate and open up, perhaps, or be open to any conversations of help.
Yeah. So I guess from the first point, so we go on site and we train construction workers about what are those signs, how can we pick them up when someone's doing a tough emotion. And then we talk about, now once we've identified those signs, and sometimes these signs can be cryptic and hidden. It can be like, I'll give you some examples, it can be like the apprentice who was running around paying back everybody for their coffees, before he attempted suicide, right? It could be the construction worker, and these are real stories, the construction worker who was playing cards in the lunchroom every lunchtime, then removes himself, goes and has lunch in the car. After the third day he suicides, the blokes on site said, we didn't know that meant suicide. We just thought he needed some space. Maybe on reflection, we should have tapped on that car window and said, mate, what's going on with you? Are you okay?
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know. Even the best of the mental health professionals miss the signs, right? So we always say to them, if anybody's listening that has lost someone to suicide, I've got to say, I am so sorry for your loss, because, the ripple effect is horrific, right? It's bad. But please don't beat yourself up on the woulda, coulda, shoulda, or the what ifs, right? Going forward, we got to look forward now about what we can do, And I'm sure I've missed some signs. I've missed signs in the past. I'm not Robinson Crusoe here, let me tell you. So, but what we do is we talk about those cryptic and hidden signs, and then we teach them about, how to keep someone safe while connecting them to help. And I think it's a good any day to talk about this one story. It's a bit long. I don't know if you've got a question in between.
No, go for it.
I'll tell you this quick story. There's a gentleman who passed away only a couple of years back at the age of 86. He died of natural causes. His name was Don Ritchie. You can look him up. They called him the Angel of the Gap. Don Ritchie lived in this beautiful, beautiful part of Sydney that you may well know of, Gary, at Watson's Bay.
Yep.
He lived across the road from what they call the Gap. The Gap is synonymous with suicides, unfortunately. It's a cliff face, right?
Yep.
It's a beautiful part of Sydney, but unfortunately people are going there to suicide, right? This has happened for decades. So he lived across the road. And he didn't come from a mental health background. He was an engineer by trade. He served in the Australian Navy. He would see the ambulance turn up. He would see the police rescue turn up, right? A couple of days later, he'd see the families and friends of lost loved ones turn up with wreaths of flowers and place them at the Gap there. And he decided to do something about it. He was outraged. So what he would do, if he saw someone standing there on their own, he would walk across the road non-threateningly and just engage in a conversation. He would then invite them back to his home for a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, even a beer, and then he would keep them safe while connecting them to help. Now, they estimate that Don Ritchie, the Angel of the Gap, they estimate that he saved about 160 lives during that time. So what I'm saying to you, Gary, is that if Don Ritchie can do it, we all can do it, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to be the mental health professional. He wasn't a mental health professional. He wasn't a psychiatrist, a psychologist. He wasn't even a counselling service.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Brad. I think for a lot of the new listeners to Mates need to be assured that they're not becoming mental health practitioners. They're just becoming that connection between providing some assistance and getting them some professional care.
And those life-saving interventions, I've got to tell you, have been amazing, because let's talk about, I'm going to quickly run into probably COVID and the elephant in the room that is vaccinations, right? So we had COVID in the industry. When it first hit, what happened with construction? Construction workers were considered essential workers or authorised workers. We were hopping on roads with no cars. It was very eerie. It was surreal. We were hopping on public transport with no people. We're arriving to site. At those early stages, we didn't know what COVID was. So we're all concerned. The blokes were wondering, well, it's good to have a job and have an income, because they're looking around their neighbourhood and they're seeing people have been impacted by lockdowns. And but they were also concerned about their family. They were concerned about, what is this virus? Will I pick it up? Will I take it back to my family? Then you fast forward to this year and the start of this year, and we had the complete shutdown of industry. Then they were concerned about, have I got a job to go back to? How do I put bread and butter on the table? How do I account for my family? How do I look after them? How do I ensure? We had all this, all the anxieties with it, all the terrible stresses that happen. And then we have the vexed issue of vaccinations. I often say, and I've said this recently out on Toolbox Talks and some of our general awareness training and whatever. Look, you've got pro-vax, you've got anti-vax. We've got them all in the industry. We've got to eat both sides. You know, if it's going to divide us, let's not talk about it. Let's talk about the footy. Let's talk about something else. Let's not talk about what divides us. Let's talk about what unites us. Because they've got some strongly held views, both sides, so you're not going to win that argument, right? And we know it's there. We know it exists. And we know what the, Service New South Wales directive says, what we have to do and all that sort of stuff for the industry, but it's a difficult. And, I've come to understand, even though I might have some strongly held views on this, I was speaking to a young bloke the other day who was talking about he wasn't vaccinated, and he went through some details why he wasn't. And, I didn't judge him. I tried not to judge him. I certainly didn't say that. I didn't say anything that was judgmental. But it was interesting to hear, it's always interesting to hear two sides of the story here.
And I agree, Brad. And I think the uncertainty with the vaccination and as you say, doesn't matter what side of the fence you sit on. I think with the uncertainty that there was, particularly with Astra, was like, and the construction workers were torn, this is all a bit too quick. This all happened too fast. I agree with you there. I think one of the points that I've been sort of pretty alerted to, and I was talking to Patricia Casaniti a few months ago, and we concurred at the same time, saying that we've now got to a point where construction and most industries are now opening up again, right? Which is fantastic. However, as you rightly pointed out, we've had people under immense stress, emotional, for long periods of time. We've now just opened the gate and said, go back to work. And the concern is, what is the mental health state? What is the mental state of those people going back to work? Is it, we've all had people working from home and there's all those stresses, et cetera, et cetera. So Patricia and myself were sort of on a safety level, we're encouraging people in our conversation to just take it easy, right? Because you've got to get back to work. You've got to actually get your motor skills happening again and refocus without sort of jumping off your Zoom meeting and then you're back in the wide world of construction.
And you hit it right on the head there, mate. So mental health, obviously, if your mind's not on the job, you're not only a risk to yourself, but everybody else working around you, right? So that's why the mental health aspect is such an important issue. But just on that, I wanted to quickly talk about the suicide rates in 2020. We expected them to explode, right? Everybody expected them to have really high rates. I don't know if you're aware, they've only just recently been released. It can take up to 2 years for a coroner to view on the cause of a death. Those 2020 stats, it was 179 deaths less by suicide than what we'd had in 2019, right? So they've actually come down marginally, but they've come down, right? But then you have a look. I had a meeting recently with John Brogden, who's the chair of Lifeline. He's also the CEO of Lancom. But John, I was having a meeting with John, and John said to me, when 2020 hit and calls to Lifeline quadrupled overnight, he said, I panicked. He said, I really panicked. But he said, I don't panic anymore. He said, because what that tells me, if you combine the 2020 stats of suicide and you look at the quadrupling of calls in Lifeline, that says that more people are reaching out for help. So, programs like ours, like Lifeline, like everybody, is starting to work, right?
Yeah.
Getting the message, right? We're breaking down the stigma, right? We're doing all these things. We're making people feel comfortable. And like the beautiful thing about our program, and I can bang on forever, but I've got to just tell you this one. I love it when you have someone, and they don't divulge if they have a mental health problem. They don't have to divulge it, right? But you end up finding out who they are at the end of the training session, because we've just made them feel that they're not entirely unique, that they're just like everybody else, right?
Yeah.
They become your champion of the program.
Absolutely.
They feel very comfortable and we've made them feel that they're right in that space, and they can then offer help even more so than somebody else that doesn't suffer from a current mental health issue, right? So it is beautiful in its nature how that sort of works too.
It's Brad. Again, I had an experience with mates in construction when I was in my safety role. I was working for a very large developer, and we asked mates to come in and conduct one of the training sessions, and it seemed to go fabulous. It's a tough topic, there's no doubt about it, but it went really, really well. I got back to the office in the afternoon, and one of the boys called me from the site and said, "Gaz, one of our own guys, it wasn't a subcontractor, it was one of our own team." He said, "One of our own guys, the young fella so and so," and I said, "Yeah, I do. He's a great kid." And he said, "Yeah, he's actually come forward today, and we've without doubt put him straight in contact with mates. Mates have intervened and speaking with his doctor, and I was like, oh, that's fabulous. It's a great story, right?" But what I didn't realise until a few days later, that he was actually planning on taking his life that day, and mates came in, and it was very, very powerful. And that young kid, who was a fantastic young guy, really respected in the business, hard working. Just the pressures of construction got to him. He lived on the Central Coast. He was travelling ridiculous hours per day, and you've heard it 1,000 times. And perhaps at that point, Brad, perhaps we could talk just a little bit about construction and how tough it is, right? And the impact that's having on the workers. It's I know a hot topic at the moment is the 5-day working week, just to get some balance back. What are your thoughts about our industry now,
Well, I point to the research and that ASRAP report that we spoke about at the beginning. That come up with a number of areas where we have unique problems for disproportionate rates of suicide, long working hours, a culture of heavy alcohol use, bullying behaviours. But here's a big one. We have an itinerant, casualised industry. So the life of the project is as good as the life of the job. We're always thinking, so job insecurity, right? So we're always thinking, have I got a job to go back to, So you got all those starting to build. So if you're dealing with some issues at home, just like that young bloke you spoke about, he might have had some issues at home, and then you're coming to work, and then do we make them feel comfortable about talking about those issues? We don't. We're male dominated, right? So if you look at the stats as well, 75% of males on average suicide right across the country, not just in construction, compared to 25% of females. And we think, well, we know, because there's a bit of research that tells us, we know that women are better at communicating their emotional issues. Blokes are not, right? We avoid it like the plague, right? We'll rather talk about, anything but our emotional issues.
Yeah, of course.
So already we're starting from a low base, right?
Yeah.
So actually, I've got to say this to you, Gary, the feminists in the industry love me. They think I'm magnificent, because I say to them, if you ever looked at a better reason for encouraging a higher female participation in our industry, it's actually looking to saving lives, because they're really good at help seeking and help offering. They're really good. They're really good at those probing personal questions, right? And us blokes may open up more to women sometimes. So I say, let's get more women in the industry, or maybe we might save some lives in the process, right? Because there is a bit of research around this, right? So the feminists love me, and women in construction love me for that reason. But I think, what we need to look at, just some practical tips I can give you. So we start off about what we know about. We might know about that person if they've had some sort of loss in their life. They may have loss of a relationship. That's huge in our industry. Loss of a loved one, family or friend, loss of money, gambling. So some sort of loss. That's the first key to the puzzle. The second one is changes. What changes you might see in someone. So it might be that, their lack of sleep, that there's been a change in their attitude, maybe, drugs or alcohol taking, some sort of change that doesn't sit well with you, And then the third one is things you might sense or hear. So if they start talking negatively, and some people do that anyway, right? But if you connect it with loss in their life, then
Yeah.
you've noticed the changes. Then you're hearing them say things like, I've had a gutful. Maybe my family's better off without me. Everything I do just turns to crap. All this sort of negative stuff. Maybe it's about time we called it out and we just asked them, listen, what's going on with you? I've noticed
Yeah.
this. I've noticed that. I'm here to help. All we ask people to do is be a good mate, right? All we ask them to be is like Don Ritchie, the angel of the gap. And those life-saving interventions are just amazing. There's so many of them. I hear them all the time in the industry. And, we can do this. We've done it already. There's proof in the pudding that we can save lives. So it's not rocket science, but if you can pick up those signs, and that's what we teach, and we do that in our general awareness training. And then the next part of our training is the connector training. And those connectors, they all volunteer. They volunteer in the general awareness training. That goes for about 45 minutes to an hour. And then they'll volunteer in that. So then we'll connect with the employer and say, we've got these people that put their hand up for connector. What do you think? Yes, we'll run the connector. The connector's 4 hours. And that's about a deeper conversation about how to keep someone safe while connecting them to help. And then, of course, we've got a third phase called Assist, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. 2 days of suicide first aid, not meant for everyone. But, we have these physical first aiders on site, knowing the stats now that suicides are disproportionately high in our industry and a lot higher than we're losing people to workplace accidents, unfortunately. We have, physical first aiders on site. Why can't we have suicide first aiders?
Absolutely.
I think it's a good question,
Absolutely. The programs that I know that a lot of guys have gone through that you guys have presented right to executive level. I know when I was at Richard Crooks, the executive team were really encouraged to do some of those training, and as sobering as it is, it's really powerful, and knowledge is power, right?
No, that's right. And Richard Crooks are a valuable industry partner, and without our industry partners, the program wouldn't exist, because only about 35% of my funding comes from the federal government.
Right.
We're seeking to get something out of the state government. There's little bits and pieces with some of these funds that we try and tap into, like the CIRA fund, or New South Wales, sort of regulated stuff. But really 65% is from industry. Without industry support, mates wouldn't be anything. So
yeah. Wow.
I encourage the industry to get behind us, but also I think that it's we've got to tell government that they need to probably fund us a bit better too.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. And as you pointed out earlier, there's some great government institutions that help around it, but I don't think anyone's closer to the construction industry than you guys. And the impact that you guys are having is second to none. So, Brad, for anyone listening today that may really like to reach out and perhaps have a chat about what Mates could do for their organisation, how could they get in contact best?
Yeah, they can get in contact us. The first port of call is our Mates helpline, and you can do that. You can ring up for any reason, right? But the Mates helpline is so important because we need to triage people. We need to know, first up, if they just need a little bit of support, or do they need an ambulance now? So that's why we always encourage them to go through our Mates helpline. That way it's in our database, confidential, totally confidential, but in our database. 1300 642 111 is our number. 1300 642 111, you can call that. And but also you can go to mates.org.au and have a look, and there's got all our research there. It's got a whole heap of information where you can get in contact with us.
Terrific. Well, I think we've covered a bit of ground today. I really sincerely appreciate you coming on and being a guest, Brad. I'm sure our listeners have taken some stuff away here. Again, listeners, 1300 642 111 if you want to get in contact with the fabulous guys there at Mates. Thank you again, Brad. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet up again. We hope to. You were right, mate. You were far better looking than Sparkles, so I'm glad you've come across screen wonderfully.
I'll let him know. You said that, Gaz.
All right, Brad. Thanks once again, mate. You take care of yourself and your family.
Good on you, Gary. Remember to look after your mates.
Thank you, mate.
See you. Bye.